Hello guys, welcome to another video. Now I'm continuing the coverage of the new Path of Exile 2 unique items in this video with another returning PoE1 unique, Redblade Banner. This item in PoE1 is all about Warcries, and whilst the monster power mechanic is at the core of Warcry mechanics in both PoE1 and PoE2, this system in PoE2 extends out quite a bit further and interacts with some other things as well, making this new unique shield quite interesting as a result. So Redblade Banner will provide a decent amount of base block chance thanks to its increased block chance modifier. On a max roll of 30% increased block chance, the base block of this shield would be scaled from 26% up to 33%, which is really quite good considering this shield's unique modifier, which we'll get onto in just a moment. Now, the Redblade Banner unfortunately doesn't provide any maximum life, but it does provide some strength, so you will get a small amount of life scaling from that. But perhaps more importantly than that, the strength roll here may be useful to help builds that are not strength focused. And that's because this shield's unique monster power modifier has a lot to do with triggers and the energy mechanic, of which all of the passive tree investment exists solely on the right side of the tree. So those types of builds will likely be heavily specced into dexterity and intelligence for evasion and energy shield gear and spell usage. So let's discuss that modifier. Enemies in your presence count as having double power. So monster power in PoE2 works a bit differently to PoE1. Monsters have a power value assigned to them at a baseline level, which is determined by their difficulty relative to other monsters. For example, the weakest monster, such as the swarming beetles in Acts 2, they'll have a default power of 0.5, whilst some of the stronger or more dangerous monsters may have a power value of 2 or even 3 if they're really strong. Importantly, this baseline power value is not inclusive of monster rarity. Instead, monster rarity is then used as a multiplier to this value. For normal monsters, the multiplier is 1, so their default power value is the final value that's used for any mechanics that utilize monster power. But for magic or blue monsters, their default power value is multiplied by 2, and for rares or yellow monsters, their default power value is multiplied by 5. Then there's unique monsters, including map bosses for example, or the new rogue exiles. These monsters always have a default power value of 20. Now, the monster power mechanic is used by a bunch of other skills and systems in PoE2. For example, Infernal Cry is a warcry that has 2 components that interact with monster power, and both will benefit greatly from monsters being treated as having double power. Firstly, the warcry empowers subsequent attacks, gaining extra fire damage based on the total power of all of the monsters combined in its radius, up to a maximum amount. So in combination with Redblade Banner, you'll be able to reach that cap a lot easier. However, Infernal Cry also has a secondary mechanic that uses the power mechanic, the explode portion of the skill. Monsters that are in the radius of Infernal Cry will be tagged with Combust, and if they die, they'll explode for fire damage in an area around them. The explosion deals a base fire damage derived from the gem level of Infernal Cry, but it deals more damage based on the power of the exploding monster, 10% more fire damage per 1 power. So doubling monster power with Redblade Banner will be able to massively scale the explosion damage, which is especially nice to trivially deal with rare monsters in the middle of packs. But monster power isn't only used for warcry mechanics in PoE2. In fact, its main implementation, as of right now, is for the energy system that's used for trigger-based skills. During Path of Exile 2's 0.1 phase of the game, a patch was released to address trigger skills such as Cast on Shock or Cast on Freeze, because these skills were triggering far too often in general mapping gameplay when you're hitting tons of monsters, and too little in boss fights where you're typically only hitting one monster, the boss. So GGG added the power mechanic to trigger skills. For those types of trigger gems, you now gain energy based on the power of the monster, with the outcome ideally being that triggers are more useful in a bossing scenario and less ridiculous in terms of how much they're triggering while you're just normally mapping. But Redblade Banner makes enemies in your presence count as having double their normal power value, and this means that many of the trigger gems can essentially gain energy twice as fast, triggering more often as a result. This does mean you'll be limited to a one-hander in this type of setup, which means you're gaining more triggers at the cost of losing damage scaling from something like a focus. Now, if you want to really trigger lots of spells, you could combine Redblade Banner with Seeing Stars, a unique mace that has a special modifier that doubles energy generation. But once again, whilst you would be triggering a lot of spells, and it would be a lot of spells going out, you'd have no damage scaling from your main hand or your offhand gear slots, which is not ideal to say the least because a large majority of the damage scaling does come from those slots. Now, aside from war cries and the energy mechanic, there's one other item to discuss in regards to the monster power mechanic. Olrovasara is a unique one-handed mace that drops exclusively from Olroth, the pinnacle boss of Expedition. This mace has the special modifier. On hitting an enemy, gains maximum added lightning damage equal to the enemy's power for 6 seconds, up to a total of 500. Now, usually this item is reserved for very fast attacking builds, so that you're able to build up enough added lightning damage from hitting enemies in the 6-second window before it starts falling off. But in combination with Redblade Banner, you'll be able to reach the added damage cap a lot faster due to gaining twice as much added damage per monster hit, as they'll count as having double the power value that they normally do. Additionally, this modifier can benefit from a good corruption to boost the damage cap to over 600, which once again benefits from Redblade Banner's modifier to be able to reach that cap in the 6-second window. Remember that this is added maximum lightning damage, so you'll have a very large damage range and therefore you'd benefit massively from lucky damage, such as the Lightning Rod passive tree notable. Redblade Banner combined with Olrovasara does potentially open up the possibility of some slower builds utilising this weapon, which in turn opens up the possibility of some abilities that typically wouldn't synergize all too well. For example, many of the builds utilising this unique mace in patch 0.1 were using Molten Blast, which fires many projectiles and can scale very high attack speed. But if you're effectively able to gain twice as much added damage because of Redblade Banner, you may be able to reach the added damage cap with less attack speed scaling or make use of different mace skills instead. Now, Redblade Banner does also have a few other less impactful modifiers. There's some added stun threshold, which is nice considering the recent stun changes, but nothing to write home about, and some increased armor, not particularly useful as the base armor on this shield is very low to begin with. But overall, this unique item is really fun in PoE2, especially in regards to the energy generation for trigger skills, and I look forward to seeing future expansions to the monster power mechanic that may provide more use cases for this unique shield. How are you getting on in the Dawn of the Hunt update now that we're a week into the new league? And let me know what you think about all of those fast updates that GGG have been making over the last few days by commenting below. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.